In 1963, a man in the Cappadocia region of Turkey was renovating his home. He was chasing his chickens, which kept disappearing through a crack in his basement wall. Frustrated, he took a sledgehammer to the wall. He expected to find a small cave or perhaps a lost storage room. Instead, he found the abyss. He hadn't just found a room, he had stumbled into Derinkuyu, a lost metropolis carved 18 stories deep into the earth. A city with enough space for 20,000 people. It had schools, chapels, stables, and ventilation shafts that reached the surface 85 meters above. For decades, historians looked at this engineering marvel and asked one question: why? Why would 20,000 people choose to live inside the earth, in the dark, cut off from the sun? The answer seems obvious: fear. Everyone knows that underground cities are places of last resort, desperate bunkers built to hide from invading armies. But there is a problem with that story. Because you don't build a winery in a panic room. This is no history, and today we are going deep. When you first step into Derinkuyu, the architecture screams defense. The corridors are intentionally narrow, low, winding. If you were a Roman soldier or a Mongol warrior, you couldn't march here. You would have to crawl, single file, your shield useless, your sword trapped against the walls. And then you would face the doors. These aren't normal doors. They are massive, circular millstones, weighing up to 500 kilograms. They can only be opened or closed from the inside. From the outside, they are immovable objects, a perfect seal. This evidence led archaeologists and historians to a very specific conclusion. This place was a bunker. And historically, that makes perfect sense. This region, Cappadocia, is the crossroads of the world. Everyone marched through here. The Hittites, the Persians, Alexander the Great, the Romans, the Arabs, the Mongols. If you lived here, your life was a constant cycle of invasion and retreat. So, the standard narrative goes like this. The locals, terrified of the next wave of conquerors, grabbed their picks and frantically dug down. They created a dark, miserable, temporary hiding spot, a place to hold your breath until the enemy passed. It appeals to our modern understanding of underground. We associate the subterranean with subways, sewers, and bomb shelters, places you go because you have to, not because you want to. We assume that living underground is an act of desperation. And looking at those rolling stone doors, standing there in the cold, damp air, it is very easy to believe that fear built this city. I believed this story too. It fits the evidence. Or at least, it fits some of the evidence. But then, you walk down to level 3, and the story starts to crack. On the third level, deep beneath the earth, you find something that shouldn't be there. It's a massive room with a distinct, sloping floor and deep basins carved into the rock. This is an industrial-scale wine press, and right next to it, storage for thousands of liters of liquid. Here is the problem. Winemaking is not an emergency activity. It requires months of fermentation. It requires stability. It requires dragging tons of grapes down narrow tunnels. If you are hiding from a Mongol horde that is burning your village, you do not pause to press a vintage of Cabernet. You bring water. You bring dried meat. You don't bring an entire winery. And it gets worse for the bunker theory. This room? It's a missionary school, a place for religious education. And over here, a baptismal font, and a chapel with a vaulted ceiling. These are institutions of culture, not survival. You build schools when you plan to stay for generations, not weeks. But the biggest contradiction is the livestock. The first level of Derinkuyu is filled with stables, mangers carved from stone, troughs for water. Calculations suggest they could house hundreds of animals: cows, sheep, horses. Now, imagine the logistics. Getting a cow down a spiral staircase is hard. Keeping a cow underground for 3 months is a nightmare. The waste alone would be toxic within days in a confined space. Unless the space wasn't confined. So we are left with a paradox. We have the defenses of a bunker, but the amenities of a palace. If these weren't emergency hideouts, what were they? To answer that, we have to look at the rock itself. To understand Derinkuyu, we first have to understand the dirt it's built in. Millions of years ago, volcanoes in this region erupted, covering the land in a thick layer of ash. Over time, that ash solidified into a rock called tuff. Tuff is a geological miracle. When it is buried, it is soft. You can carve it with a hand chisel. You can scrape it away with a shovel, but, and this is the key, when tuff is exposed to air, it reacts with oxygen and hardens. It turns into concrete. This meant the ancient people of Anatolia didn't need to build a city, they just had to subtract one. But carving a room is easy, breathing in it is hard. This is where the engineering of Derinkuyu goes from impressive to impossible. The city is pierced by 55 massive ventilation shafts. Some go down 85 meters. That is deeper than the height of a 20-story building. These shafts weren't just holes, they were a life support system. The engineers understood fluid dynamics. They placed the shafts to create a natural draft. Fresh air was pulled down to the lowest levels, and stale air was pushed up. No fans, no electricity, just physics. This system was so efficient that even today, at the very bottom level, the air is breathable. But air is only one necessity. The other is water. The shafts doubled as wells, but here is the genius detail. Many of the wells were not accessible from the surface. They were capped from the inside. Why? Because if an enemy did come, they couldn't poison the water supply. The city was a self-contained ecosystem, and it wasn't built in a day, or even a century. The first cuts were likely made by the Phrygians around the 8th century BCE, just a few basements. Then came the Romans, who expanded it. Then the Christians fleeing persecution, who added the chapels. And finally the Byzantines, who turned it into a massive military-industrial complex. This construction spanned 800 years. Think about that. We don't spend 8 centuries building a panic room. We spend 8 centuries building a home. Archaeologists have found evidence of trade routes connecting Derinkuyu to other underground cities kilometers away. A subterranean highway system. Everything we find, the scale, the timeline, the infrastructure, points away from the emergency bunker theory. But if they weren't hiding, what were they doing? The answer isn't in the rock, it's in the thermometer. Cappadocia is a land of extremes. In the summer, temperatures soar above 40 degrees Celsius. It is a baking, arid oven. In the winter, it drops to -20. Blizzards sweep across the plateau. Living on the surface means fighting a constant war against the elements. You freeze or you roast. But then, you step underground, and the temperature stabilizes. Year-round, day or night, summer or winter, the temperature inside Derinkuyu sits at a constant 13 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't a bunker. It was a refrigerator. It was the ancient world's most sophisticated HVAC system. Suddenly, the wine press makes sense. Wine needs a constant, cool temperature to ferment properly. On the surface, the heat would turn it to vinegar. Down here, it's a perfect cellar. The livestock makes sense. In the freezing winter, the animals would die outside. Down here, their body heat warms the upper levels, acting as living radiators. The food storage makes sense. Without modern refrigeration, food spoils in days. In Derinkuyu, grain, apples, and potatoes could last for months. They weren't hiding from enemies, they were hiding from the weather. The rolling stone doors? Yes, they were for defense, but defense was a feature, not the primary purpose. Just like a modern apartment building has locks on the doors, Derinkuyu had security. But you don't live in an apartment because of the locks. You live there because it's comfortable. For the people of Cappadocia, the underground wasn't a place of fear. It was an upgrade. They looked at the harsh, unforgiving surface world, and they decided to opt out. We have a bias in the modern world. We think up is progress. Skyscrapers, towers, penthouses. We build into the sky to show our dominance over nature. When we think of underground, we think of sewers, graves, and dungeons. We think of going backwards. But Derinkuyu teaches us that we might have it wrong. These people didn't fight nature. They didn't try to build glass towers in a desert. They used the earth itself as a technology. They used the geology to solve the problem of shelter, the physics of wind to solve the problem of air, and the thermal mass of the planet to solve the problem of energy. This city reminds us that the most impressive ancient achievements aren't always the ones that look dramatic on the skyline. Sometimes the true genius is in solving the everyday problem of how to live comfortably on a hostile planet. But Derinkuyu isn't the only secret waiting beneath our feet. In fact, archaeologists believe we have only uncovered about 10% of Cappadocia's underground network. I'm here to help you know the builders of the past. What other ancient engineering still blows your mind? Share your favorite in the comments below. See you at the next excavation.